So, again, if you've been joining us on these shows on Monday, we have been reading this book, Women Rapping Revolution. This work is about what has been, uh, I want to say, part of my life's journey over the past. It's been my life's journey for a minute, but basically, professors Dr. Kelly Hay and Rebecca Ferrugia, who are at Oakland University, studied us, meaning like women in Detroit hip hop. And I know that sounds crazy, but with our permission and guidance, they embedded themselves in our community, supported our community, and helped us get our story out and tell our story about Detroit women in hip hop. If you want to hear, the other episodes, I go into detail about that. This is part 3, so I want to dig a little bit more like into the book. So, yeah, and I want to say peace to the chat and peace to everyone listening. So, uh, previous chapters I had read the intro, and I had read like my forward. And so I think I'm trying to think of like, I was trying to think of like where I wanted to like go like from here, because there's so many twists and turns to this story. I so in the book, what another thing I appreciate is that is that what they've done in telling our story, or the way in which we've told our story, is we've also given some context as to what had been taking place politically in Detroit. I go into a bit more detail in the other episodes about what has been taking place politically at this, through like 2009 up through 2014 is the time period we're talking about. So, just to bring everyone up to speed, very briefly, I'll say that during the so called financial crisis, um, a decision was made federally to do what is called emergency management and create emergency management system, which is technically financial martial law. And so that was done in Detroit and lots of places in Michigan. Like I said, that's how the Flint water crisis was created. But so with that, the emergency manager basically is a bottom liner. So even though the citizens of Detroit voted for their um, so-called elected officials, what happens is when you get an emergency manager, they just put someone in to like bottom line all decisions. So it doesn't matter, like that the people technically had elections and voted so-called for their elected leaders. The people that they voted for were technically sitting in those seats, but they were not um, able to make decisions for people. All the decisions were made by the emergency manager. And so that happened for a period of time of roughly a decade. And it actually helped to disenfranchise people even more. We lost things like, PTA, right? And because they created something called like a parent network. So as opposed to the parents being empowered to fight against the school or to speak up or to stand up or to be the spokespeople, like for their children, they put this organization in the schools, and it was called Parent Network. And it made people feel like there was like a band-aid, because it was like you'll have access to things like, ESL or WIC or, food, uh what is it, GED classes, like able to get your laundry done. So there's a lot of ways, a lot of services that they offer to people. Um, I shouldn't say, but I'll say, and with that, that helps to disempower people, because what it does is even though we need services, so it's not like an either or, right? Like we need a both and. But what it does is, as opposed to people also being able to have access to their power, it kind of just helps them to just have some, not even basic needs, like a little bit below basic needs met. And so it keeps people kind of pacified, so they don't really, have a need or desire to like be invested or involved in a way, because the narrative at that point is like, oh well, we have these things that we've been asking for, which aren't really the things they've been asking for. They're just, anyway, bare minimum. But that's like an example. But imagine that was done. I gave you the example that they did like with the parent network to quiet parent voices, but the same thing happened in other spaces, like your city council, wasn't able to make their decisions, right? Like, they're getting bottom line, like all the different levels of government. And so anything that would be addressed by your city government, is now bottom line. And so instead of there being like a better decision for people, they're just looking at how to get money. And I explained the right sizing, how they said, well, Detroit wasn't the right size because population shifted. This is their narrative. Population shifted from being like 1 million people to 750,000. So they decided to make the city the right size. And so they started moving people, and they cut off their access to emergency services. They cut off their water. They cut off their street lights. They put them out their homes. They shut down like 250 schools. You'll probably hear me say this stuff over and over because it really had an impact. And so, with that, there was a lot of ways in which war was actually waged against the citizens of Detroit. And so, there were a lot of things that were lost. Hi, James. There were a lot of things that were lost in that whole process. Peace, Marley. So, with that, welcome again. Beyond Breaking Barriers, you're here to have a conversation about women in hip hop.